Hey Ian, how's it going?
Hi, Kelsey. Very well, thanks. How are you?
Good. You've got a nice empty office behind you.
Yeah, yeah, we're still not back to normal, so yeah,
Yeah,
um, probably
get
not
there
for a
eventually.
while.
Yeah. Well, I know that you tuned into some of Broadband World Forum this week. What were some of the highlights? I know you attended a session with I think Enrique Blanco with
Yeah,
Telefonica. Is that
I
right?
did. Yeah, so I think it was probably the first keynote there was actually, and he's a big figure, obviously, in the industry, as CTO of Telefonica. So I always think it's worth listening to what he has to say. And I mean, it's the Broadband World Forum, so it's good to hear someone just talking about proper broadband technology and not going off into a discussion about automation or OSS with sort of, him talking about what they've done. And the nice thing about Telefonica is they've, in that context, is they're a real kind of pioneer in that area, I think, out of the European operators. I think they probably make a claim to be the one that's invested most in fiber, full fiber networks in its markets, and especially in Spain, which if you look at the sort of rankings of different countries, Spain's right up at the top near Portugal now on full fibre availability. So the thing that really stood out to me, what he was saying, is that they've almost finished that rollout in Spain. It's almost at the point where all this money that's been spent, and it gobbles up a huge amount of capex each year to dig streets and to lay fibre. That job in Spain is almost done. And then you have this network technology in the ground, or this infrastructure rather in the ground, that you can upgrade for the next, I mean, he actually said 30 to 50 years, which is phenomenal. But I think a lot of people lose sight of that because we get used to just thinking of telecom technologies as constantly needing upgrading and modifying and improving. And that's still going to happen. But to actually have done that big civil engineering job and have the fibre in the ground means that you've got something that's going to be there for a long time. And it's almost like he's sort of hinting at we will be less capital intensive in the future. We will have a point in the future where we don't have to keep spending as much. Now, it's going to be a while before they get there because, as he pointed out, there's still a lot of work to do in their South American markets, Brazil and Chile. And they're going into Germany quite aggressively in some areas. There's reports this week actually about a sort of €5 billion project that they do with partners to bring fibre to underserved communities there. But it's just interesting that the idea that their domestic market, they're almost at a sort of finishing point now, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, 30 to 50 years out. That's
Yeah,
hard to wrap your head around.
and I guess you look at copper, and that's it's been longer than that really with some copper
Hmm.
networks. So that stuff's been sitting in the ground for most of the 20th century. So it's you can see it making sense, certainly, that you have it, and then you just sort of take advantage of new boxes in exchanges and software, and you run it over the same system, and it's not as expensive to do. How about you?
Yeah.
I mean, you tuned into a couple of things as well, didn't you, Kelsey?
Yeah, I did some interviews for the Women in Comm sessions with Sri with Verizon, Rachel Knight with AT&T, and then Prajakta Joshi with Google. And we had some really great discussions around how to identify mentors and build those relationships. We talked about, with Rachel, discussed what opportunities might come about for women as 5G deployments are underway, and just also discussed about the importance of being visible to your managers for women in telecoms. And it's kind of an awkward thing sometimes to showcase what you've done well for the company, but they gave really good advice about focusing on how you've provided the company with success versus just highlighting your own skills,
Yeah.
although that's important too.
And did they feel that sort of, because women in comms has been an issue for light reading now, something we've covered for a few years, but do they feel that this sort of, the industry's doing a better job of kind of getting women into the workplace and improving that side of things?
Yeah, I think there has been some progress there. Prajakta Joshi talked about that a lot, about the gender gap, and how things have improved since she's been in the industry, but there's still quite a long ways to go. So unfortunately, the progress is slow.
Yeah.
It's getting there, but it's just moving at a very slow pace.
Yeah, it takes time to change. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the one other thing I dipped into was a session about open source as well,
Mhm.
and that's, as I say, that's sort of getting off the topic of classical broadband really, but there are some interesting things happening there, I think, with Deutsche Telekom in particular, but also Telefonica to some extent, have been using this cord system, central office re-architected as a data center. I think they've sort of been pioneers of this, where you basically, the idea is to introduce more, I guess, white box type technologies into that part of the network, and do things actually in broadband access, where you're taking out a lot of the complexity that there used to be, and you're trying to drive down the costs. I can see the attractions. I mean, my concern is that it doesn't seem to be moving as quickly as perhaps it should be. It's been talked about now for a few years, and we're still not at the stage of seeing this stuff actually go into production networks. And I guess I'd sort of be concerned about what impact open source can have in some parts of the network. I think it's not quite right to compare it to OCP, Open Compute Project, where I think data centers, it's much easier to do this, to sort of take advantage of those technologies and make a big difference. I think there's always going to be parts of the telecom infrastructure that are really hard to kind of open source, and there's only so far that it can go. And there's not really we haven't really, I don't think, seen an operator in any area of the network come along and say, well, by using open source, we've been able to sort of cut costs massively. Now maybe that comes in future. I think one of the issues is it often gets mixed up with other things that have open in the name. Open RAN, open whatever it might be. That it doesn't necessarily mean it's open source. It just sort of implies a kind of more open collaboration, a more open way of working, and more open interfaces. But you still actually have patents, you still have licensing, you still have technology companies that want to make money that way. So I think it's interesting, but we kind of need to be wary of the hype to some extent as well, I think. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And we've been hearing about Cord for a few years now, and it does seem like there was a lot of promise around open source, but finding the right business model seems to be a real challenge.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, thanks for your time, Iain.
Okay,
and
thanks.
talk to you soon.
Yep, bye-bye.